Deep in the rain-soaked jungles of Mexico, enormous stone faces have watched silently for more than 3,000 years. Each one weighs many tons. Each appears to portray a real person, and none reveals the name of the ruler whose features were carved into volcanic rock. How did America's first great civilization move these giants across rivers and swamps, and why were some of them buried, broken, or deliberately erased before we uncover the mystery? Like the video and subscribe to the channel for more forgotten worlds, ancient civilizations, and unexplained history. The first thing to emerge from the wet green earth is not a temple wall, a weapon, or buried treasure. It is a face, broad, heavy, silent, and impossibly old. It rises from the soil of Mexico's Gulf Coast as if the landscape itself has grown eyes. Rainwater clings to the stone. Moss gathers around the mouth. The features are human, unmistakably so, yet enlarged beyond ordinary scale. Thick lips, a flattened nose, deep-set eyes, powerful cheeks, and a close-fitting helmet carved from the same immense block of dark volcanic rock. The face does not smile, it does not threaten, it simply watches, carrying an expression that seems at once alert, weary, and beyond explanation. For centuries, the tropical lowlands of southern Veracruz and western Tabasco conceal monuments like this beneath forest, pasture, mud, and the accumulated debris of time. The region is hot, humid, and threaded by rivers that shift their courses across a broad coastal plain. Heavy rains swell the waterways. Vegetation grows quickly enough to soften abandoned earthworks and swallow roads, platforms, and plazas that once organized entire communities from a distance. The land appears flat and quiet, yet beneath that surface lie the remains of one of the earliest complex civilizations in ancient Mesoamerica, a society later called the Olmec. The name itself is modern and somewhat misleading. It comes from a Nahuatl word meaning roughly rubber people, used by the Aztecs for inhabitants of the Gulf Coast many centuries after the civilization that carved the colossal heads had faded. The ancient sculptors did not call themselves Olmec, at least not as far as anyone can prove. Their own language is unknown. Their political titles are lost. Even the names of the individuals whose features were cut into basalt have vanished. What survives is the stone, and the stone presents a mystery so immediate that it can seem almost personal. One of the earliest recorded encounters with such a head takes place in the 19th century near Tres Zapotes. A local account draws the attention of José María Melgari Serrano, a Mexican traveller and antiquarian, who examines the monument in the 1860s. Much of the head remains buried, but the exposed face is enough to astonish him. He recognizes that it belongs to an ancient culture. Though the archaeological world of his time has no clear framework for understanding just how early that culture might be, the monument is too large to dismiss and too distinctive to fit comfortably within familiar ideas about the ancient Americas. Decades pass before the wider significance of these objects begins to emerge. In the late 1930s and 1940s, archaeologist Matthew Stirling leads expeditions into the Gulf Coast lowlands, visiting sites such as Tres Zapotes, La Venta, San Lorenzo, and Cerro de las Mesas. His teams work in difficult conditions, clearing vegetation, cutting trails, draining trenches, and exposing monuments that have rested for generations under soil and jungle growth. Photographs show enormous faces rising from excavation pits, surrounded by workers who appear almost miniature beside them. It becomes clear that these are not isolated curiosities. They belong to a sophisticated sculptural tradition. The scale alone is startling. The known colossal heads vary in height, but several stand well over 2 meters tall, and some weigh many tons. Each is carved from a single block of basalt, a dense volcanic stone not naturally available at most of the sites where the heads are found. The boulders must have been obtained from distant volcanic zones, particularly the Tuxtla Mountains, then transported across rivers, marshes, seasonal floods, and soft ground. Even before anyone asks who the faces represent, another mystery appears. How did a society without draft animals, heavy freight vehicles, or metal tools move and shape stones of such size? The temptation is to imagine the monuments as crude because they are ancient, but close examination reveals the opposite. The sculptors understand volume, proportion, and facial individuality. No two heads are exactly alike. The shape of the eyes changes. The mouth shifts from one monument to another, The helmets carry different bands, ear coverings, knots, or emblems. Some faces appear youthful, others older. Certain heads have damaged noses or worn surfaces, but the remaining details still suggest deliberate portraiture rather than a repeated symbolic mask. That individuality is one of the most important clues. These are probably not generic gods carved according to a fixed religious formula. They look like people, powerful people, perhaps, but mortal ones. Many archaeologists interpret them as portraits of rulers, possibly created during or after their lifetimes. Yet the evidence remains incomplete. No inscription survives beside a head naming its subject. No tomb can be securely linked to a specific face. No historical chronicle explains why these individuals deserved monuments requiring such extraordinary labour. The helmets deepen the uncertainty. They fit tightly over the skull and often include padded-looking bands or protective side pieces. Popular imagination sometimes connects them to warriors, but others have suggested they resemble equipment used in the Mesoamerican ball game, a ritual sport with deep roots in the region. Rubber is native to the Gulf Coast, and the Olmec world is associated with some of the earliest evidence for rubber processing. That makes the possibility intriguing. But it does not settle the question. A ruler could also appear as an athlete, warrior, ritual performer, or figure combining several roles. In early societies, political and sacred authority rarely divide into neat modern categories. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because the deeper one looks at these faces, the less they resemble anonymous relics, and the more they begin to feel like survivors of a vanished political world. There are now 17 generally recognized Olmec colossal heads, found at 4 major sites: San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and Rancho La Cubata. 10 come from San Lorenzo alone, the earliest great Olmec center. 4 are associated with La Venta, 2 with Tres Zapotes, and 1 with Rancho La Cubata. The number is small enough that every head matters. A single new discovery could alter ideas about regional power, workshop traditions, or the sequence in which these monuments were made. Rancho La Cubata's head is especially unusual. It is the largest known example, yet its eyes appear closed, and its style differs in subtle ways from many others. It was found closer to the volcanic source of basalt, raising questions about whether it was abandoned before transport, placed intentionally where it stood, or associated with a settlement that remains poorly understood. Scholars still debate the monument's precise history. Like so much about the Olmec, the object is physically enormous while the surviving explanation is frustratingly small. The heads also carry traces of violence and change. Some were damaged in antiquity, others were buried, moved, or reused. At San Lorenzo, several may have been carved from earlier throne-like monuments, turning an old form of political display into a new one. This reuse suggests that stone was not merely raw material. It could possess a history. A block once associated with one ruler or ritual setting might be reshaped to serve another age, another dynasty, or another claim to authority. In that sense, the faces may not only portray power, they may also record its replacement. Yet when modern visitors stand before them, political theory often gives way to something more immediate. The heads are compelling because their expressions feel specific. They preserve the presence of individuals who lived more than 3,000 years ago, in a world without written histories that modern scholars can read. Their cities have lost their voices, but their rulers, if rulers they were, remain visible in stone. The faces have outlived the names, ceremonies, alliances, rivalries, and perhaps even the memories of the communities that made them. This is why the monuments seem to guard something, not in a literal sense, and not as supernatural sentinels at the gates of ruined cities. They guard a threshold in the history of the Americas. Behind them lies a time when villages are becoming ceremonial centers, when leaders learn to organize labor on an unprecedented scale, when trade routes bind distant regions together, and when stone begins to carry political identity across generations. The heads stand at that threshold, massive and silent, announcing that complex authority has arrived. But they conceal as much as they reveal. Their realism suggests individual lives, while their anonymity erases those lives. Their scale demonstrates organized power, while the method of organization remains uncertain. Their basalt points toward distant mountains, while the exact route of transport is unknown. Their helmets imply status or role, while the meaning of their symbols escapes interpretation. No single explanation fully accounts for every head, every variation, every burial, or every act of damage. The mystery begins. Then, not with a vanished city, but with a human expression. Somewhere in the humid Gulf Coast lowlands, an ancient sculptor studies a living face or a remembered one. The sculptor marks the curve of the lips, the weight of the cheeks, the shape of the eyes. Stone tools strike basalt again and again. Chips fall away. A person becomes a monument, and a monument becomes the most enduring witness to a civilization whose own name has been lost. Long after the plazas empty and the rivers change course, the face remains beneath the earth, waiting for another world to uncover it. Long before the colossal heads are carved, the Gulf Coast lowlands already possess everything required to make a civilization possible, and almost everything required to make its growth difficult. The land stretches outward in broad, humid plains between the mountains and the sea. Rivers descend from volcanic highlands, divide into channels, overflow their banks, and leave behind dark, fertile soils in the rainy season. Water spreads across fields and forests until the boundary between land and river becomes uncertain. During drier months, the floodwaters retreat, exposing ground rich enough to support maize, beans, squash, and other crops. It is not an easy paradise. It is a landscape that rewards communities able to understand its rhythms. Heat settles heavily over the region for much of the year. Rain falls in sudden, punishing sheets. Insects multiply in stagnant pools, and dense vegetation can reclaim abandoned ground with astonishing speed. Yet the same wetlands provide fish, turtles, waterfowl, shellfish, and edible plants. Forests supply timber, fruit, game, fibers, resins, and medicinal materials. Nearby volcanic zones offer basalt, clay, pigments, and unusually productive soils. The waterways that threaten settlements also serve as roads, carrying people and goods far more efficiently than movement through thick tropical forest. The first communities here are not founded by mysterious outsiders arriving with a finished civilization. Archaeology instead reveals a long local development. Small groups hunt, fish, gather wild resources, and gradually become more dependent on cultivated plants. Villages form on natural levees and raised ground, where homes stand above at least some seasonal flooding. Families construct houses from wood, reeds, palm thatch, and packed earth. Almost none of these buildings survive directly. But post holes, hearths, storage pits, broken tools, and fragments of pottery preserve faint outlines of ordinary life. By the 2nd millennium BCE, maize agriculture is becoming increasingly important across parts of Mesoamerica, though it does not instantly replace hunting or gathering. Early maize produces smaller ears than modern varieties and requires generations of human selection. Its cultivation reflects accumulated knowledge when to plant, which soils drain well, how to store seed, and how to survive when rainfall fails or floods arrive at the wrong moment. Beans provide protein, squash offers food, containers, and durable seeds. Fishing and hunting continue to reduce dependence on any single crop. This mixed economy matters because the earliest steps towards social complexity do not begin with palaces. They begin with food security, storage, cooperation, and the ability to support people who are not gathering or farming every day. Skilled potters, ritual specialists, traders, builders, and stoneworkers can only appear in greater numbers when communities produce enough surplus to feed them. Even then, the process is uneven. A good harvest may encourage expansion. A severe flood may erase years of work. What survives in the record suggests that different villages are already exchanging materials and ideas before the first great Olmec center dominates the region. Pottery styles spread between communities. Obsidian, valued for its sharp cutting edge, arrives from distant volcanic sources. Marine shell travels inland. Greenstone objects begin to carry meanings beyond practical use. These networks are not merely commercial. They transmit stories, rituals, marriage ties, technologies, and symbols of prestige. Some communities become larger or more influential than others. Their leaders may coordinate feasts, ceremonies, trade, flood control, or construction. Authority probably grows slowly, embedded in kinship and ritual rather than imposed by a fully formed state. The evidence remains incomplete because the earlier settlements are often buried beneath later buildings, river sediment, or modern towns. Scholars still debate exactly when hereditary leadership becomes established and how strongly ordinary households depend on emerging elites. A surprising clue comes from the remains of food and refuse: fish bones, turtle shells, deer remains, charred seeds, and broken cooking vessels reveal a society rooted in wetland abundance. The ancient Gulf Coast is not simply a maize field surrounded by jungle. It is a mosaic of riverbanks, swamps, forest patches, gardens, lakes, and seasonally flooded plains. People move through these environments with intimate knowledge. They know where fish gather as waters recede, where useful palms grow, and which raised ridges remain dry during storms. Rubber trees also thrive in this humid region. By combining latex with juice from certain vines, ancient Mesoamericans learned to produce more durable rubber. The material later becomes central to the ritual ball game, but it may also be used for containers, bindings, waterproofing, and ceremonial objects. The exact date at which these techniques become widespread is uncertain, yet the Gulf Coast environment gives local communities access to a resource found in few other parts of the ancient world. The landscape shapes belief as much as subsistence. Mountains rise in the distance as sources of stone, water, clouds, and storms. Caves and springs may be understood as openings into sacred realms. Rivers bring fertility, but also destruction. Jaguars, serpents, crocodiles, and powerful birds inhabit both the physical environment and the developing symbolic imagination. Later Olmec art combines human and animal traits in ways that remain difficult to interpret. But the imagery grows from a world where nature is never passive background. By around 1500 BCE, several settlements in the region are expanding, houses cluster more densely, public spaces become larger, communities reshape natural ridges and begin raising platforms with baskets of earth. This labor requires planning and cooperation, and perhaps persuasion backed by sacred authority. There are still no colossal heads watching over plazas, but the social foundations needed to create them are already forming. The crucial transformation is not the sudden invention of civilization. It is the concentration of relationships that have developed over centuries: agricultural knowledge, river transport, craft specialization, ritual practice, long-distance exchange, and political authority begin to reinforce one another. A community controlling productive farmland and a strategic water route can accumulate food and attract traders. Successful ceremonies can strengthen a leader's legitimacy. That legitimacy can mobilize workers to build larger platforms, which in turn make the settlement more impressive and powerful. In time, one place in particular begins to rise above the others. On a broad natural plateau near the Colossal river system, people reshape the earth on a scale the region has never seen. Houses, plazas, ponds, drains, monuments, and ceremonial spaces gather into an organized center. The surrounding wetlands continue to flood, crops continue to grow, and canoes continue to move along muddy waterways. But the human landscape is changing. The scattered ingredients of complexity are being drawn together, and at San Lorenzo, they will soon produce one of the earliest great centers in the history of ancient Mesoamerica. San Lorenzo does not rise from the lowlands as a city of stone walls and towering buildings. Its power is first expressed through earth. A naturally elevated ridge becomes the foundation for an immense human-made landscape, reshaped by generations of labor until hills, terraces, plazas, platforms, and pathways begin to impose order on the surrounding wetlands. From a distance, much of this construction might appear modest beside later pyramids, yet its scale is extraordinary for its time. Thousands of baskets of soil must be carried, dumped, packed, and leveled by hand, transforming the plateau into a ceremonial and political center unlike anything the region has previously known. By roughly 1200 BCE, San Lorenzo has become the dominant settlement in the Olmec heartland. Its position is carefully advantageous. The plateau stands above much of the seasonal flooding, while nearby rivers connect it to farmland, fishing zones, neighboring villages, and distant exchange routes. Canoes can travel along waterways leading toward the Gulf Coast and inland regions. Goods arrive from far beyond the immediate lowlands, obsidian from volcanic highlands, greenstone from distant mountain zones, iron ores suitable for polished mirrors, and perhaps feathers, pigments, shells, and other materials valued for their rarity. The centre's rulers do not need to control every distant source directly. Their power may depend instead on controlling movement, ceremonies, labor, and relationships. A leader who receives exotic stone and redistributes prized objects can present himself as the point through which distant landscapes become connected. Materials taken from mountains, coasts, and river valleys gather at San Lorenzo, where skilled workers reshape them into symbols of authority. Prestige is created not only by owning rare objects, but by demonstrating the ability to obtain them. The plateau is not occupied solely by rulers and priests. It contains houses, work areas, water features, monuments, and spaces used by people of different social ranks. Archaeological remains suggest a complex community rather than an empty ceremonial stage. Farmers cultivate surrounding lands. Fishers work the rivers and wetlands. Potters produce vessels for cooking, storage, serving, and ritual use. Stoneworkers manufacture tools and ornaments. Traders carry objects and information between settlements. Laborers reshape the ground and maintain structures vulnerable to tropical rain. Daily life unfolds under conditions that demand constant maintenance. Earthen platforms erode, roofs decay, drainage channels fill with sediment, paths become muddy, forest growth pushes against cultivated land. San Lorenzo's impressive appearance therefore represents more than a single burst of construction. It requires an enduring system capable of directing repeated labor. Someone decides which platform must be raised, which route must remain open, and where monuments should stand. Whether this authority rests primarily on inherited rank, ritual reputation, economic control, or some combination of these remains debated. One of San Lorenzo's most remarkable features is its management of water. Archaeologists have uncovered systems of carved stone drains, including carefully fitted channels made from basalt. These features may have carried water through parts of the site, supplied artificial ponds, or helped control runoff. Their exact functions are not always clear, and some interpretations remain contested, but they reveal planning beyond ordinary household drainage. Water, the force that defines the lowlands, is being redirected through architecture. This carries practical and symbolic importance in a region where rainfall can sustain life or destroy it. Control over water may appear inseparable from control over society. A ruler associated with springs, rain, fertility, or agricultural abundance can turn environmental knowledge into political legitimacy. Even a limited drainage system may become evidence of supernatural favor when placed within a carefully staged ceremonial landscape. The boundary between engineering and ritual is unlikely to have been sharp. Artificial lagoons or ponds near the plateau may have stored water, supported aquatic resources, or served ceremonial purposes. Their arrangement has encouraged speculation that parts of San Lorenzo were designed according to sacred principles, though the evidence remains incomplete. What can be stated more confidently is that the settlement's builders treated the natural landscape as material. They did not merely occupy a hill, they redesigned it. Public gatherings probably play a central role in this emerging order. Feasts allow leaders to distribute food, strengthen alliances, reward supporters, and display wealth. Ceremonies bring people from surrounding communities into shared spaces. The construction of large platforms may itself become a political ritual, binding workers to a common project while making social hierarchy visible. Those who command labor stand apart from those who provide it. Yet both participate in creating the center's power. San Lorenzo's population is difficult to calculate. Tropical conditions destroy many traces of wooden architecture, and later erosion has altered the plateau. Estimates vary, but the settlement is clearly large enough to function as the center of a wider regional system. Smaller communities around it supply food, labor, raw materials, and perhaps military support. In return, they may receive protection, ritual access, trade opportunities, or social status. No surviving text explains the arrangement, and no single model fully accounts for the evidence. Conflict may also contribute to centralization. Control of rich land and river routes creates reasons for rivalry. Emerging elites must defend their positions against competitors both within and beyond the settlement. yet direct evidence for organized warfare at early San Lorenzo is limited. Stone weapons and defensive concerns cannot by themselves reveal whether violence is frequent, symbolic, or politically decisive. The society may have relied as much on marriage alliances, ritual intimidation, and controlled exchange as on open force. The monuments begin to make this hierarchy visible. Large stone thrones, altars, and carved figures appear in important spaces. Some depict powerful individuals emerging from cave-like openings, holding ropes, infants, or symbolic objects whose meanings remain uncertain. These sculptures communicate through scale and placement. A visitor entering the ceremonial center encounters authority not as an abstract idea, but as a physical presence embedded in the ground. Then the most ambitious form of portraiture appears. Basalt boulders from the distant Tuxtla Mountains are brought toward the plateau. Their arrival must have been an event in itself. A single block may weigh as much as a small herd of large animals, yet no draft beasts are available to pull it. Workers prepare roots, build rafts or sledges, cut vegetation, stabilize mud, and coordinate movement through rivers and over land. The process requires food, time, leadership, and confidence that the effort serves a purpose worthy of sacrifice. At San Lorenzo, at least 10 colossal heads eventually stand within this political landscape. Their faces differ, suggesting a sequence of individuals rather than one repeated sacred figure. Each portrait announces that a human being has become important enough to be enlarged into a monument. The heads may commemorate rulers, ancestors, or leaders remembered after death. Whatever their precise meaning, their creation marks a turning point. San Lorenzo is no longer simply a prosperous settlement on a raised ridge. It has become a place where power can command mountains to move and where a mortal face can be made to outlast the world that created it. Before a colossal head becomes a face, it is only a boulder dark, dense, irregular, and almost impossibly heavy. The stone comes from volcanic country in the Tuxtla Mountains, where ancient eruptions have scattered great masses of basalt across slopes and valleys. Some blocks may have been selected from exposed outcrops. Others may have been found as naturally rounded boulders, already separated from the bedrock by erosion. The choice matters. A sculptor must see not merely stone, but the hidden possibility within it, the width of a forehead, the depth of a cheek, the curve of a helmet, and the amount of material that can be removed without splitting the entire mass. Basalt is not forgiving. It is hard enough to resist weak tools and brittle enough to fracture unpredictably if struck carelessly. The Olmec possess no iron chisels, steel hammers, or powered cutting devices. Their tools are made from harder stone, including hammer stones of quartzite or other durable materials. With these, workers pound the surface again and again, crushing tiny particles and knocking away larger flakes. The process is slow, physical, and repetitive. A single misplaced blow can scar the surface, but thousands of controlled impacts can gradually reduce a rough boulder into a recognizable human form. The earliest stage is probably the most brutal. Large protrusions must be removed. The block is squared, flattened, and given a basic orientation. Sculptors decide which side will become the face, and which contours can be adapted into the back and crown. Some colossal heads appear to have been carved from earlier throne-like monuments, meaning their stone already carries a partially finished shape. If so, the sculptor is not beginning with a natural boulder, but with an object that once served another purpose. Old surfaces must be erased, reinterpreted, or hidden inside the new design. This reuse may explain why the backs of several heads are relatively flat. A throne or altar can be reshaped into a portrait more efficiently than an untouched boulder, though efficiency alone may not be the reason. Transforming a monument associated with an earlier ruler into the image of a successor could be a powerful political statement. The stone's history does not disappear when its surface changes. It is absorbed into the new face. Once the broad shape is established, the work becomes more precise. The sculptors mark the center line of the face, position the eyes, and define the helmet. Symmetry is important, but the heads are not perfectly symmetrical in a mathematical sense. They preserve the slight irregularities of human features and the limitations of the original stone. The sculptors understand that a face is recognized not through exact measurement alone, but through the balance of masses. The brow projecting above the eyes, the nose rising from the cheeks, the lips extending across the lower face. The depth of carving is carefully controlled, too shallow, and the features appear flat, too deep, and the nose or lips become vulnerable to breaking. The broad noses and heavy mouths may partly reflect individual appearance, but they are also structurally well suited to monumental basalt. Delicate, narrow projections would be easier to damage. The sculptors create realism while respecting the physical behavior of the material. Smaller hammerstones and abrasion techniques likely refine the surface. Sand, water, and harder mineral particles can be rubbed against basalt to smooth rough areas. Grinding reduces tool marks and allows transitions between cheeks, lips, and eyelids to become more subtle. Some surfaces may once have been polished more carefully than they appear today. Centuries of rain, soil pressure, plant growth, and chemical weathering have softened many details. What modern viewers see is not necessarily the final appearance intended by the makers. The helmet receives particular attention. Bands cross the forehead, ear coverings descend along the sides, knots, ridges, or emblems appear above the brow. These details vary enough to suggest personal insignia, rank, lineage, or ritual identity. The designs may have been copied from real headgear made of leather, textile, woven fibre, or padded material, none of which survives in the humid soil. Stone preserves the shape of objects that decay almost completely, turning the heads into rare evidence for clothing and status. The eyes are often carved with heavy lids, giving the faces their concentrated, inward-looking expression. Pupils are usually not deeply indicated, so light and shadow create much of the gaze. As the sun moves across the sky, the face changes. Morning light catches one cheek. Midday flattens the features. Late shadows deepen the eyes and mouth. The monument is not a static image in the way a small object in a museum case is static. It interacts with weather, distance, and the movement of people through a plaza. Creating such a portrait requires more than strength. It demands specialized visual knowledge. The sculptors must understand how a face viewed at close range will appear when enlarged many times and seen from below. Certain features need to be exaggerated to remain legible. The lower part of the head may be shaped differently if the monument is intended to sit above ground level. The artist must anticipate how the stone will be positioned before the final carving is complete. Whether the sculptors work from living rulers, memory, masks, sketches, or smaller models remains unknown. No drawing survives, no workshop has produced a set of instructions. Yet the individuality of the head strongly suggests careful observation. The sculptor may have studied the subject during ceremonies or created preliminary images in clay or wood. It is also possible that conventions of royal portraiture preserve only selected traits, combining likeness with idealized authority. The evidence remains incomplete, but these are not accidental faces. The labor is likely organized in teams. Some workers strike away large sections, others grind surfaces, prepare tools, move debris, provide water, repair shelters, and maintain access routes. Skilled masters probably direct less experienced assistants. Tool production itself requires expertise, because hammerstones crack and wear down. Food must be supplied continuously. If carving takes place near the basalt source, the partially shaped monument must later be transported. If it takes place at San Lorenzo, the full boulder must be moved before most of the weight is removed. Scholars still debate which sequence was most common. A surprising amount of material must disappear. To reveal a head weighing several tons, workers may remove tons of additional stone. Chips accumulate around the work area, though later cleanings, construction, and erosion can scatter them. The sound of manufacture must have been relentless, stone striking stone, day after day, perhaps for months. Dust coats skin and clothing, hands blister, tools shatter, progress appears almost invisible from 1 hour to the next. Then, slowly, the mountain becomes human. A brow emerges from the rough surface, the mouth gains tension, the helmet closes around the skull. At some point, those watching can recognize the person represented. The work is no longer merely technical. It has crossed into transformation. Basalt taken from a volcanic landscape now carries identity, memory, and political force. The finished head is not impressive because ancient people somehow overcame primitive limitations. It is impressive because they understood those limitations intimately. They knew the stone, the tools, the labor, and the risks. Through patience and accumulated skill, They converted countless small impacts into one enormous act of representation. Every smooth cheek preserves the memory of blows. Every deep-set eye is the result of careful subtraction. The face appears permanent, but its creation depends on an almost unimaginable sequence of fragile human decisions. Once the stone has been chosen and shaped, another problem remains, one even more difficult to imagine than carving it. The colossal head must somehow travel from the volcanic slopes of the Tuxtla Mountains to the political centres of the lowlands. The distance is not a straight road across firm ground. It passes through forest, rivers, marshes, seasonal floodplains, steep descents, and soils that can become deep mud after heavy rain. A monument weighing many tons has to move through a landscape where even ordinary travel demands careful timing. No Olmec transport manual survives. No carved scene clearly shows a colossal head in motion. Archaeologists must reconstruct the process from geography, engineering experiments, known technologies, and the locations of the monuments themselves. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the exact routes and methods. Yet the final result is undeniable. Basalt from the mountains reaches San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and other places far from the source, whatever the method. It works repeatedly. The journey probably begins before the stone is fully finished. Removing excess material near the source reduces weight, but carving too much creates fragile features that could be damaged during transport. A roughly shaped block is easier to move than an untouched boulder and safer than a completed portrait. Workers may therefore establish the basic form first, leaving the facial details to be refined after arrival. This balance between weight and vulnerability would require careful planning. Moving the stone downhill may be the first major stage. Trees are cut, brush is cleared, the ground is leveled where possible. Wooden rollers are often imagined, but they are not a simple solution. Rollers work best on firm, prepared surfaces. In wet tropical soil, they can sink, slide sideways, or jam beneath the load. Sledges may be more practical, especially if pulled over timber tracks. Packed earth, or layers of vegetation, lubricants such as water, clay, plant oils, or wet leaves might reduce friction, though direct evidence is scarce. Ropes made from plant fibers could provide the pulling force. Mesoamerican peoples later produced strong cordage from materials such as agave, palm, bark fiber, and other plants. Thick ropes can be twisted from smaller strands, but their strength depends on workmanship and maintenance. A single rope breaking under tension could injure workers or send the stone sliding out of control. The load would likely be secured with several lines, allowing teams to pull, guide, and break from different directions. Human coordination matters more than raw strength. Hundreds of people pulling without rhythm can waste energy and destabilize the load. A smaller group working to a shared signal may accomplish more. Leaders must call the pace, watch the terrain, and order stops before ropes fail or the sled shifts. Workers place supports under the stone, reposition rollers or track timbers, and repair soft sections of the route. Progress may be measured not in kilometers per day but in meters. The task is easier to understand when imagined as a sequence of small operations. The stone moves forward a short distance. It is secured. The path ahead is prepared. Timber is carried from the rear to the front. Mud is drained or covered. Ropes are retied. Food and water are distributed. Then the stone moves again. What appears from a distance as one heroic act is actually thousands of ordinary actions performed with discipline. Rivers probably provide the most efficient part of the journey. A sufficiently large raft can support a massive load if the weight is spread across many logs or bundled canoes. Water reduces the need to drag the stone over land, but loading and unloading remain dangerous. The raft must be brought close to shore, stabilized, and connected to a ramp. If the stone shifts suddenly, it can overturn the vessel or crush workers. River levels also matter. Too little water leaves channels shallow and obstructed. Too much creates strong currents and floods landing areas. The Coatzacoalcos River system offers possible routes between the Tuxtla region and San Lorenzo. Canoes and rafts could move downstream or across connected waterways, though some stretches may require overland transport. Seasonal knowledge would be essential. The best time for one part of the route might be the worst for another. Wet ground can make dragging easier in some places, but impossible in others. High water can float a heavy raft, yet make navigation more dangerous. Experimental archaeology has shown that very large stones can be moved with surprisingly simple tools when enough people work on carefully prepared terrain. Such experiments do not prove the Olmec used one specific method, but they weaken the assumption that advanced machinery was required. Ancient engineering often depends on organization, leverage, repetition, and an intimate understanding of local materials rather than on devices that resemble modern machines. Even so, every stage carries risk. A sledge can tip, a raft can break apart, a sudden storm can flood a work camp, ropes can rot in the humidity, workers can be injured beneath the load. The transport route must pass through territories controlled by different communities, requiring cooperation, tribute, negotiation, or force. Feeding a large labour force for weeks or months may be as difficult as moving the stone itself. This logistical burden reveals the reach of Olmec authority. A leader capable of mobilizing workers on such a scale must command more than a single household. Farmers have to provide surplus food. Craftspeople manufacture ropes, tools, wooden supports, baskets, and water containers. Local guides understand river channels and seasonal conditions. Ritual specialists may oversee ceremonies intended to protect the journey. The movement of the stone becomes a demonstration of the social system that the finished monument will later represent. It may also become a public spectacle. Communities along the route see the enormous block pass through their territory. Workers gather around it. Offerings may be made before difficult crossings. The stone's identity begins before the face is complete. It is already associated with a ruler, ancestor, or center of power. Its journey announces that San Lorenzo or La Venta can reach into distant mountains and draw a piece of them into the lowlands. The basalt therefore carries more than physical weight. Mountains are often understood in Mesoamerican thought as sources of water, fertility, clouds, and sacred power. Bringing volcanic stone from the highlands to a ceremonial center may symbolically transfer some of that force. The ruler represented by the head is not carved from ordinary local earth, but from material taken from a distant and potent landscape. When the monument finally arrives, the achievement is visible even before the sculpture is finished. The block has crossed a world of water and mud without wheels, draft animals, or metal machinery. It stands as proof that people can be organized, landscapes negotiated, and a distance overcome. The face later carved into it may portray one individual, but the stone's arrival preserves the labor of hundreds whose names are lost. The colossal heads are often described as monuments to rulers. They are also monuments to coordination. Every ridge cleared, rope twisted, raft steadied, meal prepared, and command obeyed contributes to their existence. The ruler's face may dominate the final image, yet beneath that face lies the invisible structure of an entire society moving together. When the transported basalt finally becomes a face, the monument begins to reveal something the journey itself cannot, not merely the existence of power, but the appearance of the people who held it. The colossal heads are not identical copies of a sacred type. Each has its own proportions, its own expression, and its own combination of helmet bands, ear ornaments, folds, and carved emblems, standing before several of them, even in photographs. One has the impression of meeting a group of individuals rather than a row of interchangeable symbols. Some faces are broad and compact, with heavy cheeks and deeply set eyes. Others are longer, with narrower jaws or more prominent mouths. The lips vary in shape. The noses differ in width and angle. Brow lines rise or flatten. One monument appears stern and concentrated, another calm, another almost fatigued. Weathering has altered their surfaces, and ancient damage has removed important details. Yet the surviving differences remain too consistent to dismiss as accidental variations in workmanship. This individuality strongly suggests portraiture. The sculptors may have been recording the features of living rulers, recently deceased leaders, or ancestors preserved through memory. They may also have combined likeness with an ideal image of authority. A ruler's face does not need to be copied with modern photographic precision to be recognized by those who know him. Certain features can be emphasized: the shape of the mouth, the heaviness of the eyelids, a distinctive cheek, or the arrangement of ceremonial headgear. The heads therefore occupy a complicated space between person and office. They appear human enough to represent individuals, yet monumental enough to transform those individuals into something larger than ordinary life. A face carved several times larger than nature no longer belongs only to one body. it becomes a political presence, able to watch a plaza, confront visitors, and remain visible long after the subject has died. The helmets are among the clearest signs that these are not casual portraits. Each fits closely around the skull, often extending downward beside the ears. Some display horizontal bands across the forehead. Others carry raised elements, knots, circular forms, or motifs that may once have identified a lineage, office, military group, or ceremonial role, because cloth, leather, and woven fibers decay quickly in the tropical lowlands. The heads preserve forms of clothing that might otherwise be completely unknown. The helmets may have been padded, their carved side pieces resemble protection for the ears and temples, leading many observers to compare them with headgear worn during the Mesoamerican ball game. The game could be physically dangerous, involving a heavy rubber ball struck with the hips, arms, or other parts of the body depending on local rules. Protective equipment would have been practical, yet resemblance does not prove function. Similar head coverings might also have been used in warfare, public ritual, processions, or ceremonies involving impersonation of ancestors. The carved emblems may offer clues, but no surviving Olmec text explains them. A band that looks decorative to a modern viewer might once have communicated a specific title. A knot could mark family identity. An ear covering might indicate rank. The evidence remains incomplete because symbols only become readable when connected to a broader system of names, stories, and social roles. Without that context, the most important details can remain visible and still resist understanding. The expressions are equally difficult to interpret. Modern viewers often describe the faces as angry, solemn, watchful, or sad. But such labels may reveal more about modern expectations than ancient intention. A relaxed mouth enlarged in stone can appear stern. Deep eyelids can suggest exhaustion. Damage to the lips or nose can alter the emotional character of a face. The sculptors may not have intended to show emotion at all. They may have been emphasizing composure, endurance, or the controlled stillness expected of a ruler in public. Even so, the heads do not feel lifeless. Their expressions possess a restrained intensity. They seem to look past the viewer rather than directly at one. This may result from the absence of carved pupils, but it also gives them a distant, ceremonial quality. A ruler represented in this way is present without appearing conversational. He belongs to the human world, yet he has been removed from ordinary human interaction. Most scholars assume the individuals are male, partly because of their monumental political context and the appearance of the headgear. However, certainty is difficult. The Olmec left no readable labels identifying sex, title, or name. Facial appearance alone cannot resolve the issue, especially when filtered through artistic convention. It remains possible that some monuments represent people whose identities do not fit modern expectations about ancient leadership, though there is currently no strong evidence for a specific alternative. The heads also raise questions about age. Some faces appear mature, with heavy features and a sense of physical weight. Others seem younger. If these differences reflect real age, the monuments may commemorate leaders at different stages of life. They could have been commissioned during a reign, after a ruler's death, or when a successor sought to claim connection with an ancestor. A portrait made from life might preserve one appearance, while a posthumous monument could idealize another. Their placement would have shaped how these individuals were understood. A head standing near an important approach might confront visitors arriving at the center. One placed within a plaza could oversee ceremonies and gatherings. A group of heads might form a sequence of predecessors, turning political history into a visible landscape. Unfortunately, many monuments were moved, buried, damaged, or discovered outside their original context, making reconstruction difficult. At San Lorenzo, where 10 heads have been found, the number itself suggests repeated acts of commemoration. The monuments may represent a succession of rulers across generations. If so, the plateau once contained a gallery of political memory, each face linked to a period of construction, alliance, conflict, or ritual change now lost. The people who walked among them may have known every name. They may have recognized the deeds associated with each expression and helmet design. Modern archaeology can measure the heads, compare their stone sources, study tool marks, and reconstruct their locations. It can identify patterns invisible to casual observation, yet it cannot restore the voices that once explained who these people were. What survives in the record suggests powerful individuals whose authority was considered worthy of enormous collective effort, but their personal stories remain silent. That silence is part of their force. The faces are extraordinarily specific, while the lives behind them are almost entirely unknown. A ruler's eyes, cheeks, and mouth survive for more than 3,000 years, but not his name. His image remains while the language spoken around it disappears. The colossal heads therefore preserve both presence and loss. They allow the ancient inhabitants of the Gulf Coast to look back at the modern world. But they do not tell us what they expected us to understand. The individuality of the colossal heads makes one conclusion seem almost unavoidable. These are important people. What remains uncertain is the kind of importance they possess. The monuments could portray rulers, warriors, ancestors, ball players, ritual specialists, or figures whose authority combines several of these roles at once. Modern categories encourage separation, but ancient political life may not have recognized such clear boundaries. A leader could command labor, oversee ceremonies, represent a lineage, participate in warfare, and appear in the ball game without any contradiction. The interpretation favored by many archaeologists is that the heads represent rulers. Their enormous scale, costly materials, and placement within major ceremonial centers support this view. No ordinary individual could easily command the transport and carving of a basalt block weighing many tons. The monuments embody concentrated authority. A ruler's face enlarged to monumental proportions would make hierarchy visible to everyone who entered the plaza. The image would not need an inscription. Recognition, memory, and controlled public ceremony could supply the meaning. The number of heads at San Lorenzo strengthens the idea of a ruling sequence. 10 portraits may represent several generations of leaders, each added as power passed from one individual to another. Their differences in facial structure and helmet design fit this possibility. The monuments could have acted as a stone genealogy, preserving political continuity even as living rulers changed. A new leader might stand among the faces of predecessors, presenting himself as the latest link in an enduring line. Yet no royal tomb has been securely matched to any head, and no readable text identifies a subject as king. The word ruler is therefore an interpretation rather than a direct translation from Olmec evidence. Scholars infer political leadership from settlement size, labor organization, elite materials, monumental art, and regional influence. The conclusion is persuasive, but the exact nature of office remains unknown. Olmec authority may have been hereditary, negotiated among powerful families, or shared between several leaders. A colossal head could commemorate one member of a broader elite rather than a single supreme monarch. The helmets introduce the possibility of warfare. Their close fit and heavy side coverings resemble protective equipment. In a conflict, padded headgear would reduce injury from clubs, stones, or other weapons. If the portraits represent warrior rulers, the helmets may advertise their ability to defend the community, raid rivals, or control strategic routes. Leadership in many early societies depends partly on success in organized violence, even when direct evidence for large battles is limited. Olmec art contains images of captives, bound figures, weapons, and scenes that may involve domination. Some monuments appear to show individuals holding ropes connected to smaller figures, though interpretation is difficult. Violence clearly exists in the symbolic world, but it is uncertain how often it occurs in everyday politics. The colossal heads themselves display no obvious wounds, weapons, or aggressive gestures. Their stillness communicates control rather than action. If they are warriors, they are shown not in combat but in the calm state of those who claim mastery over it. Another influential explanation connects the helmets to the Mesoamerican ball game. The Gulf Coast is especially significant because rubber-producing trees grow there, and ancient communities develop methods for turning latex into resilient material. Rubber balls are known from archaeological context in the broader region, and the ball game becomes one of the most enduring institutions of Mesoamerican life. It is played for recreation, ritual, diplomacy, status, and perhaps at times to settle disputes or dramatize cosmic struggle. A heavy rubber ball can cause serious injury. Later players wear protective belts, pads, and head coverings, though equipment varies across time and place. The helmets on the colossal heads could therefore identify elite ball players. This does not necessarily conflict with the ruler interpretation. leaders may have participated ceremonially in important games or sponsored teams representing their communities. Athletic performance could demonstrate strength, divine favor, and political legitimacy. The difficulty lies in proving that the carved headgear belongs specifically to the ball court. No surviving scene shows one of the colossal individuals actively playing. Some helmets resemble later protective equipment, but resemblance across centuries can be misleading. The Olmec ball game itself is still imperfectly understood. Courts, balls, figurines, and related imagery survive, but the rules, social meaning, and identities of participants are only partially recoverable. What looks like sports equipment may instead be formal regalia used in several contexts. The ancestors offer another possibility. A colossal head may have been created after a leader's death and treated as the enduring presence of a founding figure. Ancestor veneration can transform political memory into sacred authority. Living elites justify their position by claiming descent from powerful predecessors, while the dead continue to participate symbolically in ceremonies. A stone face placed in a plaza could make that relationship visible. It does not merely remember an ancestor. It allows the ancestor to remain part of public life. This interpretation helps explain why monuments might be buried rather than destroyed when political conditions change. Burial can be an act of rejection, but it can also be a controlled ritual. A revered image may be removed from active use while still treated as powerful. The monument is placed beneath earth, hidden but not erased. In such cases, the colossal head might resemble a retired political body. Withdrawn from the plaza when a lineage loses power or when a ceremonial landscape is redesigned. Some scholars have considered whether the heads portray ritual specialists or sacred impersonators. Their helmets could belong to costumes worn during ceremonies in which elites embody supernatural beings, ancestors, or forces of nature. Olmec art frequently blends human and non-human characteristics, especially in smaller carvings and reliefs. The colossal heads, however, remain strikingly human. They lack the obvious fangs, cleft heads, animal features, or composite forms seen in other Olmec imagery. This realism makes them more likely to portray actual people, even if those people also performed sacred roles. Popular theories have sometimes moved far beyond the archaeological evidence. The facial features of the heads have been used to claim contact with ancient Africans or other distant populations across the Atlantic. Such arguments generally rely on subjective judgments about appearance rather than on securely dated artifacts, genetic evidence, maritime technology, or a consistent pattern of cultural exchange. Mainstream archaeologists regard these transoceanic claims as unsupported. The heads are best understood within the population history and artistic traditions of ancient Mesoamerica. Modern racial categories are especially unreliable when applied to stylized monuments created more than 3,000 years ago. Broad noses, full lips, heavy cheeks, and other features appear among many human populations and can also reflect artistic choices suited to basalt. The sculptors may exaggerate particular traits to preserve visibility at monumental scale. A face can look familiar to different modern observers for entirely different reasons. But resemblance is not evidence of migration. The strongest explanation therefore remains that the heads portray high-ranking Olmec individuals, probably rulers, shown in ceremonial or protective headgear. Yet even this broad conclusion leaves room for several identities at once. A ruler may be remembered as an ancestor, celebrated as a warrior, and represented in the costume of a ball player. Political authority often draws strength from precisely this accumulation of roles. No single explanation fully accounts for every helmet, location, expression, act of reuse, or burial. The colossal heads resist narrow labels because the society that created them organized power differently from modern states. Their subjects may not have needed to choose between king, athlete, priest, and warrior. They may have been all of these in the eyes of their communities. The question is therefore not simply what occupation the heads represent. It is how one human face came to carry the weight of an entire political order. The answer lies less in the helmet alone than in what the monument demands from society-distant stone, organized labor, skilled artists, controlled space, and shared belief. Whatever these individuals did in life, their people accepted that their faces deserved to become mountains. A colossal head does more than preserve a face. It changes the space around it. Once placed within a plaza, beside a pathway, or near an elevated platform, the monument becomes part of the way power is experienced. People do not merely hear that a ruler is important. They walk beneath his enlarged features. They gather where his image remains visible. They enter a political landscape in which authority has been transformed into stone, scale, and memory. This is one reason monumental portraiture matters so deeply at San Lorenzo and later Olmec centers. A living leader can appear only in one place at a time. A carved head can remain permanently present. It can watch ceremonies during the ruler's absence, survive after his death, and continue to communicate status to people who never saw the original individual alive. The monument turns temporary power into something that appears natural and enduring. Its material strengthens that message. Basalt comes from distant volcanic country, not from the ordinary soil beneath nearby houses. Transporting it requires coordination across landscapes and communities. Carving it demands specialized labor. Positioning it within the ceremonial center requires further planning. Every stage demonstrates that the person represented can command resources unavailable to most households. The finished portrait is therefore both image and evidence. It shows the ruler's face while proving the reach of the system built around him. The monument may also conceal the human cost of that system. Hundreds of workers can disappear behind a single portrait. Their labor is absorbed into the ruler's features until the achievement seems to belong to him alone. Food produced by farmers, ropes made by craftspeople, routes cleared by laborers, and decisions made by engineers all become invisible once the stone stands completed. The face receives the glory. The society that made it becomes anonymous. This imbalance is itself political. Monumental art simplifies a complex community into a clear hierarchy. One individual becomes enormous, while the people who supported his authority remain physically absent. The message does not need to state that all power belongs to the ruler. Scale quietly implies it. The head is larger than any living person, more durable than any wooden house, and harder to move than almost anything in the lowlands. Placement would have intensified that effect. A head positioned along a route of approach could confront visitors before they reached the most important spaces. One installed beside an elite residence or ceremonial platform could connect the ruler's image with restricted access. Several heads arranged across the plateau might create a landscape of predecessors, making the entire center appear guarded by an established line of authority. Unfortunately, later movement and disturbance have made many original arrangements difficult to reconstruct, but what survives in the record suggests deliberate display rather than random decoration. The face may have been recognizable to different audiences in different ways. Elite families might identify the individual, his lineage, and the meaning of each helmet emblem. Ordinary residents may know only that he belongs to the ruling order. Foreign visitors might not know his name at all, yet the scale and setting would still communicate power. Monumental imagery works partly because its basic message survives even when its details are not understood. Lineage is likely central to that message. If multiple heads represent successive rulers, each new portrait does more than honor one person. It adds another link to a political genealogy. A current leader can claim legitimacy by standing among the images of those who came before him. The monuments make descent visible, even if the relationship is partly constructed or politically selective. Certain ancestors may be celebrated while rivals are forgotten, buried, damaged, or recarved. The reuse of earlier stone thrones for colossal heads may belong to this process. A throne associated with one ruler can be transformed into the portrait of another, transferring both material and symbolic value. Such an act might honor continuity, erase a defeated predecessor, or appropriate the authority of an older dynasty. Scholars still debate the meaning of this reuse, but it suggests that monuments participate actively in political change. They are not neutral objects preserved beyond history. They are altered as power shifts. Ritual would give these portraits additional force. Ceremonies held before the heads may have involved offerings, music, incense, feasting, bloodletting, public declarations, or processions. Though the exact practices remain uncertain, the monument's presence could transform a political gathering into a sacred event. A ruler standing near the stone image of an ancestor might present his authority as inherited not merely through family, but through contact with powerful beings and places. The basalt itself may have carried sacred associations, taken from volcanic mountains connected with rain, caves, fertility, and the origin of rivers. The stone could embody more than prestige. Its arrival at the ceremonial center may symbolize the ruler's ability to draw distant natural forces into the human world. In this reading, the head does not simply portray authority. It materializes a relationship between the leader, the ancestors, and the landscape. Olmec leadership probably depends on this fusion of practical and supernatural control. Rulers organize labor, exchange goods, distribute food, and manage alliances, but they may also claim special access to forces believed to govern rain, crops, health, and political order. Success strengthens the claim. A good harvest, profitable trade, or military victory can be interpreted as evidence that the leader's relationship with the sacred world is effective. Failure creates danger. Because political legitimacy tied to cosmic balance can weaken when floods, droughts, disease, or conflict expose its limits. The colossal head helps stabilize that fragile authority. Stone suggests permanence even when political reality is unstable. A ruler may face rivals, poor harvests, or uncertain succession, yet his portrait presents an image of calm control. The expression remains composed. The helmet sits firmly in place. No anxiety, negotiation, or opposition is visible. Monumental portraiture turns contested power into apparent certainty. Public construction may also bind communities to the ruling center. Workers who participate in moving and carving the stone become part of the monument's history. Their labor can create obligation, shared identity, or resentment. A project of such scale may be presented as service to the community, the ancestors, or the supernatural order rather than to one individual. Feasts and ceremonies can reward participation. Leaders may distribute food and valuable goods, transforming compulsory labor into a performance of generosity. Yet cooperation does not mean equality. The ability to summon workers reveals growing social distance. Some people direct, others carry. Some receive rare greenstone ornaments, polished mirrors, and elaborate burials, while others remain archaeologically visible, mainly through tools, cooking vessels, and domestic refuse. The colossal heads stand at the point where collective achievement becomes elite representation. Their power therefore comes from contradiction. They are made by many hands but show one face. They depend on temporary human bodies yet claim permanence. They emerge from cooperation while displaying hierarchy. They may commemorate ancestors, but they also help living rulers control the present. As long as the monuments remain in active ceremonial spaces, they reinforce the political order that created them. When they are buried, damaged, or moved, that order is changing. Stone can make authority appear eternal, but even basalt cannot prevent succession, rivalry, environmental disruption, or collapse. The colossal heads preserve the image of control while quietly recording how much effort was required to create it. Their stillness is not the absence of politics. It is politics made visible and given a face. The power displayed at San Lorenzo does not remain confined to its plateau. It moves outward along rivers, through wetlands, across mountain passes, and into distant valleys, carried not only by traders but by objects, symbols, habits, and stories. The Olmec world is often imagined as a compact civilization centered in the Gulf Coast lowlands, yet its influence reaches far beyond that humid heartland. Jade, obsidian, ceramics, rubber, shells, pigments, mirrors, and carved images travel across Mesoamerica, linking communities separated by hundreds of kilometers. Rivers make much of this possible. In the lowlands, waterways are not obstacles between settlements. They are the main routes of movement. Canoes carry people more efficiently than travel through dense forest or across saturated ground. A trader can load a vessel with pottery, food, tools, or stone, and follow channels that connect inland villages with larger centers. River knowledge becomes a form of power. Those who understand currents, seasonal floods, hidden branches, and safe landing places can move goods through a landscape that appears almost impassable to outsiders. San Lorenzo stands near one of these networks. The Colossal river system links the plateau with the Gulf Coast, nearby wetlands, and routes leading toward the volcanic highlands. From there, exchange can continue overland into the Valley of Oaxaca, the Basin of Mexico, the Pacific Coast, and the Maya lowlands. No single central government needs to control every stage. Goods may pass through many hands. traded repeatedly between communities. By the time an object reaches San Lorenzo, its original maker may live far beyond the political knowledge of the person receiving it. Obsidian is among the most important materials moving through these networks. Volcanic glass fractures into edges sharper than many metal blades, making it valuable for cutting meat, working wood, preparing plants, and performing ritual bloodletting. The Gulf Coast does not possess major local sources, so obsidian must be imported from distant highlands. Chemical analysis allows archaeologists to match many fragments to particular volcanic regions, revealing long-distance connections invisible from the object's appearance alone. Different sources may carry different political meanings. A blade from one highland zone could indicate a relationship with a specific community or route. Control over supply would matter because obsidian is both practical and prestigious. Most households need cutting tools, while elites may seek especially fine blades, polished pieces, or exotic source material. The trade therefore links daily survival with political display. Greenstone travels even farther. Jadeite and related materials are prized for their colour, hardness, and polished surface. Their green tones may evoke vegetation, maize, water, fertility, or life itself. Skilled artisans turn them into beads, celts, pendants, figurines, and ritual objects. Some pieces are small enough to fit in the hand, yet the distance they travel and the labour required to shape them give them immense value. A polished greenstone object can embody connections to distant mountains and the authority of those who command access to them. Iron ores such as magnetite and hematite are also shaped into polished mirrors. These objects are surprising products of early Olmec craftsmanship. When carefully ground and polished, their surfaces can reflect an image or concentrate light. Some are slightly concave, possibly capable of focusing sunlight. Though their exact uses remain debated, they may function in elite costume, ritual performance, divination, or displays of supernatural power. A dark stone surface producing a clear reflection would have seemed extraordinary in a world without glass mirrors. Marine shell moves inland from the coast. Feathers, animal skins, pigments, salt, cacao-like products, medicinal plants, and rare woods may also circulate, though preservation is uneven. Perishable goods leave fewer traces than stone or ceramic. The archaeological record therefore gives a distorted picture, emphasizing materials that survive while erasing many of the substances people may have valued most. What remains suggests that exchange was broader and more complex than surviving objects alone can show. Rubber provides the Gulf Coast with a resource of special importance. Latex from local trees can be mixed with plant juices to produce a more durable, elastic material. Rubber balls become central to the Mesoamerican ball game, while other uses may include bindings, handles, waterproof coatings, and ritual objects. The Gulf Coast's control over rubber-producing environments may have strengthened its role within wider exchange systems. Yet objects do not move alone. Artistic styles spread with them. Olmec-related imagery appears at sites far from San Lorenzo and Venta: downturned mouths, cleft heads, infant-like figures, jaguar traits, crossed bands, flame-like eyebrows, and complex supernatural beings combining human and animal forms. Some motifs appear on pottery, stone carvings, figurines, and portable greenstone objects. Their wide distribution once encouraged the idea that the Olmec imposed a unified culture across Mesoamerica. The reality is more complicated. Local communities do not simply copy Gulf Coast art without change. They adapt symbols to their own traditions, combine them with regional styles, and sometimes produce works that may influence the Olmec in return. Scholars still debate whether the Gulf Coast acts mainly as the source of these ideas or as one powerful participant in a larger network of experimentation. The evidence remains incomplete because trade, migration, marriage, pilgrimage, diplomacy, and ritual exchange can all produce similar patterns. A carved object found far from the Olmec heartland does not automatically prove political control. It may have been traded, gifted, carried by a traveller, copied by a local artisan, or deposited generations after its manufacture. Elite families in distant regions may adopt Olmec symbols because those symbols communicate prestige. Wearing a greenstone pendant or commissioning a figure in a recognized style can connect a local leader to a larger world of sacred authority. This circulation creates a shared visual language without erasing regional identity. Communities separated by mountains and forests begin to recognize similar symbols of rulership, fertility, transformation, and ritual power. Ceremonial practices become comparable even when languages and political systems differ. The ballgame spreads. Monumental architecture develops in multiple regions. Public plazas, earthen platforms, caches, offerings. And elite burials become part of a broader Mesoamerican pattern. San Lorenzo benefits from standing near the center of these movements. Its rulers can receive rare materials, sponsor skilled artisans, and redistribute prestige goods to allies. A gift of jade or obsidian can secure loyalty. A marriage may open a trade route. A ceremonial gathering may bring distant leaders into temporary cooperation. Exchange becomes diplomacy, and diplomacy strengthens the image of San Lorenzo as a place where the wider world converges. But networks also create dependence. A center that relies on distant materials must maintain relationships and safe routes. Political conflict, environmental change, or the rise of competing settlements can redirect trade. River channels shift. Alliances break. Communities that once sent goods to one center may begin favoring another. The same waterways that carry influence outward can carry wealth away. For a time, however, the system flourishes. Canoes move beneath heavy skies loaded with stone, pottery, food, and messages. Traders step ashore at villages whose languages may differ from their own. Small objects pass from hand to hand, carrying meanings that change along the route. A mirror made in one region appears in an elite ceremony far away. A carved symbol from the Gulf Coast is copied on local clay. A rubber ball enters a court surrounded by people who may never have seen San Lorenzo, yet participate in traditions connected to it. The colossal heads remain fixed in place, but the civilization they represent is anything but isolated. Its strength depends on movement, rivers flowing, canoes traveling, materials circulating, and ideas crossing boundaries. The faces carved in basalt seem immovable, yet behind them lies a world held together by constant exchange. The network centered on San Lorenzo does not disappear in a single dramatic moment. Its decline is slower, more uneven, and more difficult to explain. Around 900 BCE, the settlement's political importance begins to weaken. Monumental construction changes. Some sculptures are damaged, buried, or moved. Areas once carefully maintained lose their central role. The plateau remains occupied. But the concentration of authority that created the earliest colossal heads no longer functions in the same way. Power is shifting elsewhere. For a civilization without readable historical records, decline must be reconstructed from altered buildings, broken monuments, settlement patterns, and environmental evidence. None of these provides a complete narrative. San Lorenzo may have suffered political conflict, changes in trade, river instability, internal rivalry, or several pressures operating together. Scholars still debate which force mattered most. What survives suggests transformation rather than simple destruction. The rivers that supported San Lorenzo may also have threatened its stability. Channels migrate naturally across the Gulf Coast plain, cutting new routes and abandoning old ones. A settlement positioned near an active waterway can prosper while that channel carries trade and fertile sediment. If the river moves, the same settlement may lose access to transport, fishing grounds, or productive land. Flooding can erode platforms and cover fields. Sediment can block canals and landing places. Even small environmental changes become politically dangerous when authority depends on controlling movement and agricultural abundance. There is no clear evidence that one catastrophic flood suddenly ends San Lorenzo. The lowlands experience repeated environmental change, and local communities are skilled at adaptation. Yet political systems can be less flexible than households. Farmers may shift fields or relocate homes, while rulers tied to monuments, ceremonial spaces, and established trade routes cannot move so easily. A center designed to appear permanent may become vulnerable, precisely because so much authority has been invested in one landscape. Internal conflict offers another possibility. The deliberate damage to monuments has sometimes been interpreted as evidence of rebellion or invasion. Colossal heads and other sculptures show mutilation, broken surfaces, and marks that may have been inflicted intentionally. If enemies attack the center, damaging elite images would be a direct assault on political authority. If local factions overthrew a ruling lineage, the same acts could erase or humiliate previous leaders. But monument damage does not always mean uncontrolled violence. Some sculptures may have been ritually terminated, deliberately buried, or prepared for reuse. A broken monument can mark political rejection, ceremonial closure, or respectful retirement. No single explanation fully accounts for every damaged object. The pattern is important, but its meaning varies from case to case. As San Lorenzo's dominance weakens, another centre rises farther east, near the Tonelá River in what is now Tabasco. La Venta occupies an island-like ridge surrounded by wetlands, rivers, and seasonal floodplains. Its location gives access to fertile environments and water routes, but its builders do not simply copy the older centre. They create a different ceremonial vision, more formally arranged and more strongly organised around a central north-south axis. By around 900 BCE, La Venta is becoming the leading centre of the Olmec heartland. Its great earthen constructions reshape the low ridge into a sacred landscape. Platforms, plazas, buried offerings, tomb-like structures, and monumental sculptures are arranged with careful attention to orientation. The largest mound rises above the surrounding plain, visible from a distance across wetlands that otherwise remain low and flat. Though eroded and altered over time, it represents one of the most ambitious structures of its era. The mound was once thought to resemble a volcanic cone, perhaps intentionally echoing distant sacred mountains. Whether its original form was truly conical remains debated, since erosion and later disturbance have changed its profile. Even so, its scale creates an unmistakable artificial mountain in a region with little natural elevation. The builders bring verticality into the lowlands, raising a ceremonial centre above water, forest, and ordinary settlement. La Venta's layout reveals an increasing concern with controlled movement. Visitors may have approached along prescribed routes, passing monuments and plazas in a deliberate sequence. Certain areas are open to gatherings, while others appear more restricted. Architecture organises not only space but access, separating ordinary participants from those permitted to enter elite or sacred zones. Buried offerings deepen the mystery. Workers excavate large pits, place carefully arranged blocks of serpentine or other greenstone materials inside them, cover the deposits, and rebuild the surface above. Some of these offerings are enormous, yet they were never meant to remain visible. Their value lies in the act of burial. Rare stone imported from distant sources is placed beneath plazas, transforming the ground itself into a sacred deposit. One famous arrangement includes small greenstone figures standing around upright stone objects, forming a miniature scene whose meaning remains unknown. The figures may represent rulers, ancestors, ritual participants, or a mythic gathering. They were buried carefully, hidden from later viewers. Such deposits show that Olmec monumentality does not depend entirely on visible display. Power can also be created through secrecy, sacrifice, and the deliberate concealment of valuable objects. 4 colossal heads are associated with La Venta. They continue the tradition established at San Lorenzo, but they belong to a new political centre with its own rulers and ceremonial ambitions. Their presence suggests that monumental portraiture remains important even as power changes location. The new elite does not reject the language of the colossal face, it adopts and reshapes it. The heads at La Venta may have stood near important approaches, confronting those entering the site. Like their San Lorenzo counterparts, they wear distinctive helmets and display individual facial features. Yet their placement within a more formally ordered complex may have made them part of an even more controlled ceremonial experience. The visitor moves through a landscape where ruler portraits, altars, stelae, platforms, and buried offerings reinforce one another. Trade networks also adjust to the new centre. Materials continue to arrive from distant regions, including jadeite, obsidian, serpentine, iron ores, and other prestigious substances. La Venta's rulers use these goods to sustain alliances and ritual authority. The centre's prosperity shows that the wider Olmec world survives San Lorenzo's decline. Political leadership has shifted, but the system of exchange, symbolism, and elite display remains active. This transition warns against imagining civilization as a single city rising and falling in isolation. San Lorenzo and La Venta belong to overlapping networks. People, craftsmen, rituals, and political ideas may move between them. Some families from the older centre may participate in the rise of the new one. Rivals may redirect tribute and trade. Local communities may change allegiance without abandoning their language, farming practices, or religious traditions. The change may also reflect a new style of rulership. San Lorenzo's power is expressed through reshaping a broad natural plateau and placing monumental portraits across it. Venta creates a more axial, ceremonial landscape filled with hidden deposits and carefully staged approaches. Both centers depend on organized labor, but they use that labor to produce different experiences of authority. By the time Venta reaches its height, the oldest heads at San Lorenzo may already belong to a fading political memory. Some remain visible, others have been buried or damaged. The people of the Gulf Coast still live among rivers, cultivate maize, trade rare materials, and carve stone, but the symbolic center of their world has moved eastward. The faces remain, yet the order they once guarded has changed. This is the deeper lesson of the transition. Monumental power can survive in stone while political power flows elsewhere, following new rivers, new alliances, and new claims to sacred authority. San Lorenzo does not vanish completely, and Venta does not arise from nothing. One center declines into the landscape as another begins to dominate it, carrying forward the Olmec tradition while quietly transforming what that tradition means. The colossal heads are often imagined standing permanently in open plazas, watching the same pathways for centuries. Archaeology reveals a less stable history. Many monuments were moved, damaged, buried, or reshaped long before modern excavators found them. Their journeys did not end when they reached San Lorenzo or Venta. Stone that had already crossed rivers and wetlands could be made to travel again, sometimes only a short distance, sometimes into a completely different political setting. The monuments were not simply abandoned when their original purpose ended. They were treated as objects whose power continued to matter. At San Lorenzo, several heads were found away from the places where they may first have stood. Some appear to have been arranged in lines or grouped near particular areas of the plateau, though erosion and ancient relocation complicate any reconstruction. Their surfaces carry dents, pits, grooves, and broken sections. Noses are damaged, lips are scarred, helmet details have been struck away. These marks immediately suggest violence, but the pattern is more complicated than a single attack. An invading enemy might deliberately mutilate a ruler's portrait. Destroying the face would attack the individual's memory and the authority of the lineage he represented. A rival faction within San Lorenzo could have done the same after seizing power. Monumental images often become targets during political upheaval because they make authority visible. To break the nose or mouth of a colossal head would be to announce that the old ruler could no longer see, speak, breathe, or command. Yet many marks may not represent a moment of chaotic destruction. Some appear systematic, as if the stone were struck repeatedly in controlled locations. The monuments may have been ritually deactivated before burial or relocation, in societies where images are treated as active presences rather than lifeless decorations. Ending a monument's public role may require ceremony. Damage can close the eyes, silence the mouth, or separate the image from the force it once embodied. The act may appear violent while still being governed by strict tradition. Burial itself is equally ambiguous. A monument placed beneath earth can be hidden in disgrace, protected from enemies, retired with respect, or offered to the sacred landscape. The Olmec routinely bury valuable objects that were never intended to be recovered. At Venta, enormous deposits of greenstone are sealed beneath plazas. Figurines are carefully arranged and concealed. Within such a ritual world, hiding a colossal head does not necessarily mean that it has become worthless. Concealment can increase sacred power by removing an object from ordinary sight. The heads may have been buried when ceremonial spaces were redesigned. Earthen architecture changes constantly. Platforms are enlarged, plazas resurfaced, drains rebuilt, and new buildings raised over older ones. A monument standing in one arrangement may become inconvenient or politically outdated when the landscape is transformed. Rather than hauling it away completely, workers could lower it into a pit, cover it, and build above him. The old face would remain beneath the new order, physically incorporated into the ground. Such an act could symbolize continuity. A new ruler builds upon the presence of his ancestors, literally placing the former political world beneath his own. It could also symbolize conquest. A defeated predecessor is pushed below the surface, while a new portrait occupies the plaza above. Without inscriptions or intact ceremonial contexts, scholars still debate which meaning applies in particular cases. The most revealing evidence for reuse comes from the stone itself. Several colossal heads appear to have been carved from earlier throne-like monuments. These large rectangular sculptures, traditionally called altars, often show a seated figure emerging from a niche resembling a cave or doorway. The figure may hold ropes connected to smaller captives or descendants, though the imagery remains disputed. Their flat tops may have supported rulers during ceremonies, making the monument both sculpture and political seat. Turning such a throne into a head requires more than minor alteration. The earlier image must be cut away, corners are rounded, the front is reshaped into a face. The broad mass of the old monument determines the proportions of the new portrait, while the flat rear may survive as a trace of its previous form. This transformation saves the labour of transporting another boulder from the mountains, but practical convenience cannot fully explain it. Stone was available, though costly. Choosing an old throne may have carried deliberate meaning. A throne is already saturated with political memory. It has supported ceremonies, displayed authority, and perhaps been associated with a particular ruler. Recarving it into a head could preserve that ruler in a new form. The seated, living body becomes a permanent face. Alternatively, a successor might appropriate the stone of a predecessor, erasing the earlier image while inheriting its prestige. The same act can honour, replace, and dominate at once. The process also reveals that Olmec monuments were not always created for a single unchanging purpose. Modern museums encourage the idea that a sculpture has one finished form. In the ancient Gulf Coast, a block of basalt could pass through several identities. It begins as volcanic rock, becomes a throne, becomes a portrait, then perhaps becomes damaged, buried, and rediscovered. Each transformation adds another layer of meaning. Relocation may have been equally significant. Moving a head from one part of a centre to another changes the audience that encounters it. A monument once visible in a public plaza might later stand near a restricted residence. A portrait linked to a ceremonial approach could be placed among other ancestors. Its political message would shift even if the carving remained unchanged. Space gives monuments part of their meaning, and changing the space can rewrite the story they tell. Some heads may have been transported after the death of the people they portrayed. A new ruler could gather earlier portraits into a commemorative group, creating an ancestral sequence. Another could scatter them, weakening the memory of a competing lineage. The evidence remains incomplete, but the repeated movement suggests that control over old monuments was itself a form of power. The damage seen today also comes from later centuries. Tropical weather dissolves sharp edges, roots press into cracks, floodwater carries abrasive sediment, farmers clear fields, roads, oil development, and modern settlement disturb archaeological sites. Some monuments were moved after discovery to museums or protective parks, saving them from further damage but removing them from their ancient landscapes. Preservation protects the stone while inevitably changing how it is experienced. Still, the ancient scars remain distinct from modern weathering. They show that the colossal heads were involved in the political lives of the communities that made them. They were not eternal guardians untouched by change. They could fall from favour, survive dynastic shifts, or be transformed into something new. Their weight did not make them immune to history. This may be why they endure so powerfully. Each face appears calm and immovable, yet its surface records instability. Authority rises, monuments are commissioned, successors take power, symbols are altered, and old rulers disappear beneath new earth. The basalt survives, but not in the form or place its makers first intended. What looks like permanence is really a sequence of transformations, each one leaving a mark on the face. The colossal heads preserve faces with extraordinary clarity, yet the people behind those faces remain difficult to define. Archaeologists can identify cities, trade routes, monuments, tools, and patterns of settlement, but identity is more fragile. The civilization called Olmec left no surviving historical account that modern scholars can read. There is no royal list, no clear statement of origin, and no text announcing what its inhabitants called themselves. Even the familiar name belongs to a much later world. Olmec comes from a Nahuatl term associated with the people of the rubber-producing Gulf Coast. The Aztecs used related words more than 2,000 years after the earliest colossal heads were carved. Modern scholars adopted the label for the ancient civilization centered at San Lorenzo, La Venta, and nearby sites, but there is no evidence that these ancient communities used it themselves. The word is useful, yet it can create the misleading impression of a single nation with fixed borders, one language, and a unified sense of identity. The reality was probably less tidy. The Gulf Coast lowlands contained many settlements spread across rivers, wetlands, forests, and agricultural zones. Communities may have shared religious symbols, artistic traditions, trade relationships, and forms of political organization while still maintaining local loyalties. People living near San Lorenzo could have understood themselves differently from those living near La Venta, even when both participated in what archaeologists now call Olmec culture. Language presents one of the largest gaps. The region later became home to speakers of mixed Zoquian languages, and some linguists have proposed that ancient Olmec communities may have spoken an early form belonging to that family. Certain loanwords found in other Mesoamerican languages, especially terms connected with crops, ritual, and trade, have been used to support this possibility. The hypothesis is plausible, but it remains difficult to prove. Languages can spread through trade, migration, elite influence, or later population movement, so their historical distribution does not map neatly onto archaeological cultures. If the Olmec did speak an ancestral mixed Zoquian language, their influence may survive in words exchanged across Mesoamerica, yet no inscription securely translates into a known sentence. A handful of objects bear signs that may represent writing, including the famous Cascajal block, discovered near the Olmec heartland and covered with repeated symbols arranged in rows. Some researchers consider it evidence of an early writing system dating to the 1st millennium BCE. Others remain cautious because the block was not recovered from a carefully excavated archaeological context, and the signs have not been deciphered. The possibility of writing changes how the colossal heads are understood. If Olmec elites possessed a system for recording names, titles, or events, then the identities of the rulers may once have existed in written form. Those records could have been painted on wood, bark paper, cloth, or plaster, all materials unlikely to survive the humid environment. Stone monuments may have carried painted signs that weathered away. The silence of the heads may therefore be a result of preservation rather than the absence of writing. Even without readable texts, archaeologists search for identity through households, cooking vessels, figurines, tools, burial practices, and food remains reveal how people lived outside ceremonial centres. Differences in pottery style can show regional connections, though pots do not correspond automatically to ethnic groups. One community can adopt another's ceramic techniques without changing its language or ancestry. Traders, craftspeople, spouses, and captives may all carry objects across cultural boundaries. Human remains might offer clearer evidence, but preservation is poor in the acidic soils of the Gulf Coast. Skeletons decay rapidly, limiting the study of diet, health, ancestry, and migration. In some regions, isotopic analysis can reveal where an individual grew up, while ancient DNA can trace biological relationships. For the Olmec heartland, such evidence remains rare and incomplete. The tropical environment has erased much of the biological record, leaving stone faces far better preserved than the bodies they represent. This absence has encouraged modern observers to project identities onto the heads. Their broad noses, full lips, and heavy facial features have sometimes been used to argue that the Olmec came from Africa or another distant region. These claims remain unsupported by mainstream archaeological evidence. No secure pattern of African artifacts, genetics, ships, domesticated species, or sustained transatlantic exchange appears in Olmec contexts. Human features vary widely within indigenous American populations, and monumental sculpture cannot be used as a reliable racial chart. The argument also misunderstands portraiture. A sculptor working in basalt makes choices shaped by material, scale, convention, and political purpose. Features may be emphasized to remain visible from a distance. The broad structure of the faces may reflect real individuals, but modern racial categories developed in much later societies and cannot simply be imposed on ancient stone. Resemblance alone is not proof of migration. The people represented by the heads were almost certainly rooted in the long population history of Mesoamerica. Their ancestors belonged to communities that had lived in the Americas for thousands of years, adapting to local rivers, plants, animals, and seasonal cycles. The rise of Olmec centers does not require a foreign civilizing force. Agriculture, trade, architecture, and political hierarchy emerge through regional developments visible across many generations. Yet calling the civilization entirely local does not mean it was isolated. People traveled, marriages connected distant communities, traders crossed linguistic boundaries, ritual specialists carried symbols from one region to another, captives or migrants may have entered Olmec settlements from far away. San Lorenzo and Venta were likely diverse places, drawing people from surrounding villages and perhaps from more distant regions. Complex societies rarely consist of one unmixed population. Political identity may have mattered more than broad ethnic identity within the ceremonial centers. A person could belong to a particular household, lineage, village, occupational group, and ruler's domain at the same time. Loyalty may have focused on ancestors, sacred places, or local leaders rather than on membership in a civilization stretching across the Gulf Coast. The modern category Olmec gathers these overlapping identities into one archaeological name because the surviving materials share recognizable patterns. This raises another question: was there ever an Olmec empire? The influence of Olmec imagery across Mesoamerica once led some scholars to imagine direct domination from the Gulf Coast. Today, many are more cautious. San Lorenzo and Venta clearly controlled substantial labor and regional resources, but there is little evidence that they governed every distant community using Olmec symbols, trade, imitation, pilgrimage, intermarriage, and competition can spread artistic traditions without imperial administration. Even within the heartland, political unity may have been temporary. San Lorenzo rises first, then declines as Venta becomes dominant. Smaller centers continue to develop their own identities. Alliances shift. Ruling families may compete over river routes and access to rare materials. What appears archaeologically as one culture may have contained rival states whose inhabitants recognize their differences far more sharply than their similarities. The colossal heads themselves may express these distinctions. Helmet emblems, facial features, carving styles, and monument locations could identify particular lineages or centers. A person living in the ancient lowlands may have recognized a San Lorenzo ruler as clearly as a modern viewer recognizes a national leader. Those distinctions are now nearly invisible because the names and symbols have lost their explanations. What survives in the record suggests a connected but varied world, not a single people frozen under one label. The Olmec were farmers and fishers, rulers and laborers, artisans and traders, residents of great centers and inhabitants of small river villages. They may have spoken more than one language and followed local traditions beneath a shared ceremonial vocabulary. Their identity remains difficult to recover because archaeology preserves what people made more easily than what they called themselves. Basalt endures. Names do not. The colossal faces therefore offer the strange appearance of intimacy without introduction. Modern viewers can study the shape of a ruler's mouth more clearly than they can know the language he spoke. His image has crossed 3,000 years, while the words that once defined his world have vanished into the humid soil. By the time Venta begins to lose its central importance after about 400 BCE, the Olmec world has already changed many times. San Lorenzo has risen and declined, political authority has shifted eastward, trade routes have expanded, adapted and redirected. Monumental traditions have been reused, buried and transformed. The end of the great centers is therefore not the disappearance of an entire people. It is the weakening of a particular form of political organization, one built around ceremonial landscapes, elite exchange, and the ability of rulers to command labor on an immense scale. Venta's decline, like that of San Lorenzo, does not arrive with one securely identified catastrophe. There is no single destruction layer proving that invaders swept across the site in one decisive assault. Nor is there evidence that every inhabitant suddenly abandoned the region. Instead, construction slows, ceremonial spaces lose their former importance, and the political networks that sustain the center begin to fragment. The process may have been gradual enough that those living through it did not recognize it as the end of an age. Environmental change remains one possible cause. Venta stands within a wetland landscape shaped by rivers, floods, sediment, and the shifting coastline. These forces create fertile soils and efficient transport routes, but they also make permanence difficult. A river channel that once carried traders and tribute can fill with sediment or move away. Agricultural land can become waterlogged, eroded, or less productive. Storms can damage earthen platforms and houses. Saltwater intrusion near the coast may affect fields and freshwater supplies when shorelines or channels change. No single environmental explanation fully accounts for the decline. The inhabitants of the Gulf Coast had adapted to flooding and river movement for centuries. They knew how to rebuild platforms, change planting areas, and exploit varied wetland resources. Environmental pressure becomes historically decisive only when it interacts with social vulnerability. A powerful centre can survive repeated floods if its alliances remain strong and its labour system functions. The same event becomes a crisis when rival elites are already competing and distant communities no longer accept the centre's authority. Trade may have become increasingly difficult to control. Venta's rulers depended on access to jadeite, obsidian, serpentine, iron ores, shell, and other materials from distant sources. These goods supported ritual performance and elite generosity. If alternative routes developed or rival centres gained direct access to suppliers, Venta's ability to present itself as the indispensable centre of exchange would weaken. Communities that once delivered goods, food, or labour could redirect them elsewhere without abandoning the broader cultural traditions they shared. The rise of new centres across Mesoamerica may therefore have contributed to the old heartland's decline. By the later 1st millennium BCE, increasingly complex societies are developing in Oaxaca, central Mexico, the Maya region, and other areas. These communities build their own monumental centres, organise regional trade, and adapt religious imagery to local political needs. They no longer require a Gulf Coast centre to provide every prestigious symbol or ceremonial model. What once gave Venta influence becomes part of a wider shared world. Internal political conflict may have accelerated the process. Monumental rulership depends on continuity. A leader must persuade communities that the existing order connects human society with ancestors, fertility, rain, and cosmic stability. Succession disputes can expose how fragile that claim is. If several lineages compete for authority, the labour force may divide, public construction may stop, monuments associated with defeated rulers may be damaged or buried. Regional allies may take advantage of uncertainty to withhold tribute or support a rival. The colossal heads and other elite sculptures would have become especially vulnerable during such changes. A monument that once made authority appear permanent could become evidence of a failed political order. It might be attacked, hidden, or reinterpreted. Yet this does not necessarily mean the surrounding population rejects every older belief. People can abandon one ruling dynasty while continuing to play the ball game, honour sacred mountains, exchange greenstone, cultivate maize, and perform rituals inherited from earlier generations. This distinction is essential. Archaeological cultures do not vanish in the same way a living person dies. Their recognizable combinations of art, architecture, and political organization change. Some practices disappear, others survive, and many are absorbed into new societies. The inhabitants of the Olmec heartland do not simply dissolve when Venta declines. They remain in villages and towns across the Gulf Coast. Their descendants continue to live within the region, though their languages, political affiliations, and cultural expressions evolve. Tres Zapotes becomes one of the clearest examples of continuity through transformation. Located west of the earlier centres, it grows in importance during the later Olmec period and remains occupied long after Venta's decline. 2 colossal heads are found there, linking the site to the older tradition. But its later monuments and settlement patterns point toward a different political world. Authority may be less concentrated, and several groups may share power rather than submitting to one dominant ruler. A famous monument from Tres Zapotes bears an early long count date, evidence that writing and calendrical traditions continue to develop after the age of San Lorenzo and Venta. The surviving date is incomplete, and its interpretation has required careful reconstruction. But it belongs to a system later used extensively by Maya societies. This does not mean the Olmec invented every later Mesoamerican institution. It shows that the Gulf Coast remained part of a broader zone of innovation, even as its earlier ceremonial centres declined. Archaeologists sometimes use the term epi-Olmec for societies that follow the major Olmec centres in parts of the Gulf Coast. The label captures both continuity and difference. Artistic traditions persist, but styles change. writing becomes more visible, political landscapes reorganize, new rulers draw upon old symbols without recreating San Lorenzo or La Venta exactly. The past remains useful, but it no longer dictates one form of authority. Ordinary life also continues beneath these political transformations. Farmers still plant maize, beans, and squash. Fishers continue to work rivers and lagoons. Families repair thatched roofs, make pottery, raise children, and bury their dead. Craftspeople shape stone and clay. Traders carry goods between communities. To people living outside elite centres, the decline of monumental construction may have altered obligations more than daily survival. They may owe less labour to one ruler and more to another, or become part of smaller regional networks. Some communities may even have benefited from political fragmentation. The collapse of centralised authority can reduce the demands of tribute and mass labour. It can also create insecurity, disrupt exchange, and increase conflict. The consequences are rarely uniform. One lineage loses prestige while another gains it. One settlement is abandoned while another expands. A ceremonial plaza grows quiet, but a nearby village continues for generations. The phrase Olmec collapse is therefore useful only if handled carefully. It refers to the end of the dominant centres and the political system they represent, not to the extinction of a population. What disappears most clearly is the ability to organise society around enormous ruler portraits and vast ceremonial projects. The colossal heads cease to be carved, or at least no later examples are currently known. Their political language no longer serves the new order in the same way. The faces remain behind as evidence of a world that has changed. Forest and sediment gather around them. Later inhabitants may know their origins, reinterpret them, or eventually forget whom they portray. The rulers lose their names, but the communities of the Gulf Coast endure. Civilization does not end. It disperses, adapts, and continues under forms that the old monuments were never designed to guard. Long after the great centres of San Lorenzo and La Venta lose their dominance, the influence associated with the Olmec remains visible across Mesoamerica. It appears in stone carvings, greenstone figurines, ceremonial architecture, ritual deposits, and recurring images of rulers, supernatural beings, caves, maze, jaguars, serpents, and powerful infants. Similar motifs emerge in regions separated by mountains, forests, and long travel routes. The resemblance is strong enough to raise one of the most persistent questions in the archaeology of the ancient Americas: were the Olmec the original source from which later Mesoamerican civilization developed? Or were they one influential participant in a much broader network of societies changing together? For much of the 20th century, the Olmec were often described as Mesoamerica's mother culture. The phrase suggested that the essential features of later civilization first took recognizable form in the Gulf Coast heartland and then spread outward. Monumental architecture, elite rulership, long-distance trade, sacred imagery, ritual ball games, calendrical knowledge, and perhaps early writing all seem to appear unusually early at Olmec sites. San Lorenzo flourished centuries before many better-known Maya cities, and its colossal heads demonstrated political organization on an extraordinary scale. The argument carried real force. Olmec-style objects have been found far beyond Veracruz and Tabasco, including in central Mexico, Oaxaca, Chiapas, Guatemala, and other regions. Greenstone carvings travelled enormous distances. Pottery vessels displayed motifs closely related to Gulf Coast art. Elite communities adopted symbols that appear connected with Olmec ideas of rulership and supernatural authority. To early researchers, the pattern looked like cultural expansion from one creative centre. Yet the phrase mother culture creates problems. It can make other ancient societies appear passive, as if they simply received civilization from a more advanced people. Archaeology increasingly shows that communities across Mesoamerica were already developing agriculture, ritual practices, trade networks, social inequality, and public architecture through their own long histories. The Olmec did not introduce settled life to empty lands. They interacted with populations that possessed their own traditions and ambitions. This has led many scholars to prefer the idea of sister cultures. In this model, the Olmec are one important member of a family of interacting societies. Gulf Coast centres may be larger or more influential at particular moments, but ideas move in several directions. Artisans, traders, rulers, migrants, and ritual specialists connect regions through exchange. A symbol appearing at San Lorenzo may have local roots, foreign inspiration, or both. The development of civilization becomes a conversation rather than a one-way gift. The debate is difficult because influence rarely leaves a simple trail. If a carved motif appears earlier in one region than another, that does not automatically prove where it originated. Archaeological dates have ranges of uncertainty. Older examples may remain undiscovered. Portable objects can be moved long after they're made. Local artists can imitate foreign styles, while foreign artists can work in local workshops. A single image may carry different meanings in different communities. Consider the famous imagery sometimes called the Olmec dragon, the were-jaguar, or the Makes deity. These names are modern attempts to organize complex forms that combine human, animal, and supernatural traits. Similar features recur across many objects: cleft foreheads, downturned mouths, crossed bands, flame-like eyebrows, fangs, and almond-shaped eyes. It is tempting to treat them as parts of a standardized Olmec religion exported across Mesoamerica, but without deciphered texts. The identities of these beings remain uncertain. The same visual element may represent several ideas rather than one fixed god. Local adaptation is clearly visible. Communities outside the Gulf Coast often incorporate Olmec-related motifs into their own artistic traditions instead of copying them exactly. A greenstone figure produced in one region may use Gulf Coast conventions while depicting local dress or ritual practice. A ceramic vessel may borrow a facial form but place it within a different symbolic setting. Such objects reveal admiration and connection, but not necessarily political submission. The strongest evidence for Olmec primacy comes from chronology and scale. San Lorenzo is already a major center by around 1200 BCE. Its rulers mobilize labor, reshape a massive plateau, import exotic materials, and commission colossal portraits at a time when few other known settlements in Mesoamerica operate on a comparable level. This makes the Gulf Coast an undeniable center of innovation. Even scholars cautious about the mother culture model generally agree that Olmec elites played a major role in spreading artistic and political ideas. The disagreement concerns how exclusive that role was. Some researchers argue that Gulf Coast rulers deliberately promoted a prestigious ideological system that distant elites adopted to strengthen their own authority. Olmec-style objects may have functioned almost like an international language of power. A leader in Oaxaca or the Maya lowlands could display certain symbols to show participation in a wider elite world. Much as rare luxury goods later connect courts across continents, others emphasize that distant communities helped create that shared language. They supplied raw materials, developed local forms, and may have contributed ideas that returned to the Gulf Coast. Jadeite, for example, came from sources far southeast of the Olmec heartland. Obtaining it required relationships with communities along the route. The people who controlled the stone were not simply suppliers to an Olmec center. They possessed bargaining power, knowledge, and ritual traditions of their own. The bull game offers a similar problem. The Gulf Coast's rubber resources and early evidence make the region central to its development, but whether the Olmec invented the game is uncertain. Ball courts, rubber balls, figurines, and related imagery appear in several regions. The game may have developed gradually through interaction among communities rather than in one place. Its later importance across Mesoamerica reflects centuries of adaptation, not the preservation of one unchanged Olmec institution. Writing and calendars remain equally contested. Early signs from the Gulf Coast, including the Cascajal block and later Epi-Olmec inscriptions, suggest experimentation with recorded language and time. Yet early writing also develops elsewhere. The available evidence is too fragmentary to establish one uncontested birthplace. Humid conditions may have destroyed bark paper books, wooden texts, and painted surfaces that would clarify the sequence. What survives is a tiny sample of what once existed. No single explanation fully accounts for the combination of early Gulf Coast power and widespread regional creativity. The Olmec were neither isolated inventors responsible for everything that followed, nor merely one ordinary culture among many. Their centers were unusually influential. Their rulers commanded extraordinary resources. Their art carried authority across great distances, but their achievements grew from interaction with neighboring societies, imported materials, shared environments, and older traditions. The debate matters because it changes how civilization itself is understood. A mother culture model tells a story of invention followed by diffusion. A sister culture model tells a story of exchange, competition, imitation, and parallel development. The archaeological record increasingly favours a more complex middle ground. Certain innovations may have emerged strongly in the Olmec heartland, while others developed through wider networks. Influence moved outward, but it also returned. The colossal heads stand at the centre of this argument. Nothing quite like them appears elsewhere on the same scale, making them distinctly Olmec. Yet the political ideas they embody ancestry, rulership, sacred landscape, public ceremony, and monumental memory become fundamental across later Mesoamerica. The form is local, the underlying language becomes shared. Perhaps the Olmec legacy is best understood not as a blueprint imposed on the future, but as a powerful early demonstration of what organized society could become. Their centers showed that rulers could mobilize thousands, draw materials from distant lands, reshape terrain, and turn human identity into permanent public art. Other societies observed, adapted, resisted, and transformed those possibilities. The Olmec did not create the entire Mesoamerican world alone, but they helped change the scale on which that world imagined power. The colossal heads do not return to the modern world all at once. They emerge gradually, one face at a time, from fields, forest clearings, ranch land, and excavation trenches across the Gulf Coast lowlands. By the 19th century, local communities already know that ancient stone monuments lie beneath the soil. Farmers encounter fragments while working the land. Travelers hear reports of unusual sculptures. The stones are not truly lost, because people living near them have never been entirely unaware of their presence. What changes is the arrival of scholars attempting to place the monuments within a chronological and archaeological history. When José María Melgar y Serrano examines the head at Tres Zapotes in the 1860s, he recognizes its extraordinary character but lacks the evidence needed to identify the civilization responsible. Archaeology in Mexico is still heavily focused on better-known societies such as the Aztecs and Maya. The idea that an even earlier civilization had raised great ceremonial centers in the tropical lowlands has not yet gained wide acceptance. The head appears isolated, detached from the political world that created it. During the early 20th century, discoveries accumulate. Explorers and archaeologists document unfamiliar monuments across Veracruz and Tabasco. Their style is distinctive but difficult to date. Some researchers initially assumed that the Olmec works belong to a relatively late period or represent a regional variation of Maya art. Others suspect greater antiquity. The disagreement cannot be settled by appearance alone. Reliable excavation, stratigraphy, and eventually radiocarbon dating are needed to reveal how deep in time the Olmec centers truly extend. Matthew Stirling's expeditions during the late 1930s and 1940s transform understanding of the region. Working with Smithsonian support and Mexican collaborators, his teams investigate Tres Zapotes, La Venta, San Lorenzo, and other sites. Dense vegetation must be cleared before monuments can be mapped. Excavations reveal that colossal heads belong to large ceremonial landscapes containing platforms, plazas, altars, drains, offerings, and additional sculptures. The faces are no longer isolated wonders. They become evidence for a complex society. The discovery of an early calendrical date at Tres Zapotes helps demonstrate the antiquity and intellectual importance of the Gulf Coast tradition. Later radiocarbon research confirms that San Lorenzo flourished by around 1200 BCE, placing its greatest period many centuries before the height of classic Maya civilization. America's ancient history suddenly appears deeper and more complicated than many earlier narratives had allowed. The colossal heads are recognized not as the products of a peripheral culture, but as monuments from one of Mesoamerica's earliest major centers. Excavation brings knowledge, but it also creates new risks. A monument protected underground for centuries becomes vulnerable once exposed. Tropical rain penetrates cracks. Heat and moisture encourage biological growth. Salts and minerals move through the stone. Roots, insects, pollution, and repeated human contact slowly alter the surface. Basalt appears indestructible beside wood or cloth, yet even basalt weathers. The carved eyelids soften, helmet patterns fade, and ancient scars become harder to distinguish from modern damage. Some heads are moved to museums or archaeological parks, where they can be guarded and studied. Transporting them is a major engineering operation in its own right, strangely echoing the ancient journeys from the Tuxtla Mountains. Cranes, trucks, reinforced supports, and paved roads replace ropes and rafts, but the mass of the stone remains the same. Moving a head may protect it from agricultural machinery, looting, erosion, or industrial development. Yet it also removes the monument from the landscape that originally gave it meaning. A colossal face viewed beneath a museum roof is physically safer and easier to examine. Visitors can see tool marks, damaged surfaces, and subtle differences between portraits. But the surrounding rivers, wetlands, volcanic horizons, and ceremonial approaches are absent. The head becomes an artwork standing alone rather than one part of an engineered political landscape. Preservation, therefore, requires compromise. Leaving a monument in place protects context but may expose it to environmental danger. Moving it protects the object while weakening its connection to place. San Lorenzo and Venta have faced threats far beyond natural weathering. Modern roads, oil exploration, pipelines, farming, ranching, urban growth, and looting have disturbed parts of the Olmec heartland. Venta was particularly affected by petroleum development during the 20th century. Monuments were relocated, and portions of the ancient site were altered or destroyed before their full archaeological significance could be recorded. What survives in the record is substantial, but it represents only part of the original landscape. New technology now allows researchers to examine what remains without relying entirely on broad excavation. Aerial mapping, remote sensing, satellite imagery, geophysical survey, three-dimensional scanning, chemical analysis, and detailed study of stone sources reveal features difficult to recognize from ground level. Digital models preserve the present condition of sculptures and allow tiny surface changes to be monitored. Regional surveys show that monumental planning extended beyond a few famous centers into a wider landscape of smaller settlements and ceremonial sites. These methods continue to challenge the idea that the Olmec world consisted only of isolated capitals ruled from above. The great centers depended on surrounding communities whose fields, workshops, boats, and labor sustained them. Archaeology increasingly searches for those communities, not merely for royal monuments. The colossal heads remain the most recognizable objects, but the civilization cannot be understood through elite faces alone. Their modern cultural meaning has also changed. The monuments have become symbols of ancient Mexican achievement and of the deep indigenous history of the Americas. They appear in textbooks, museums, public art, documentaries, and popular culture. Their scale makes them instantly memorable. Their expressions invite identification even when their names remain unknown. For many viewers, a colossal head is the first image that makes the Olmec seem not abstractly ancient, but human. That recognition carries responsibility. The heads are not mysterious objects from an empty past. They belong to the history of indigenous peoples whose descendants and cultural connections remain part of modern Mexico. Interpretations that credit distant outsiders with creating them diminish the long local development visible in archaeology. The monuments were produced by Mesoamerican communities with intimate knowledge of their environment, sophisticated political institutions, highly trained artists, and networks extending across a vast region. Scholars will continue to argue over the identities of the faces, the meaning of their helmets, the organization of Olmec government, and the extent of Gulf Coast influence. New discoveries may overturn assumptions that currently appear secure. Another buried head may still wait beneath pasture or forest. A workshop may preserve evidence of carving methods. A newly discovered inscription could reveal a title, a place, or even a name. The evidence remains incomplete. And that incompleteness is not a failure. It is the condition under which archaeology approaches a world whose records survive unevenly. For now, 17 recognized heads remain as the most powerful witnesses. They do not explain themselves, yet they establish beyond doubt that the ancient Gulf Coast supported leaders capable of mobilizing labor, commissioning individual portraiture, and transforming distant volcanic stone into political memory. They show that some people became large enough in the imagination of their societies to be represented as landscapes in human form. The cities around them changed, rivers migrated, platforms eroded, Dynasties ended, languages shifted, and the ceremonies once performed before the heads disappeared. Yet the faces survived those losses. They watched fields replace plazas and modern roads cross ancient routes. They endured burial, rediscovery, relocation, and interpretation. They still guard no living kingdom, but they continue to stand at the entrance to one of the deepest stories in the Americas. The story of how organized power first became monumental, how memory was given weight, and how a civilization without a surviving name made itself impossible to forget. The rain still falls over the Gulf Coast lowlands much as it did when the first workers carried baskets of earth onto the ridge at San Lorenzo. Rivers still move through the plain, sometimes following ancient channels and sometimes cutting new paths through soil that holds fragments of forgotten houses. Forest roots descend beside buried platforms. Water gathers in depressions once shaped by human hands. Beyond the wetlands, the Tuxtla Mountains remain dark against the horizon, holding the volcanic stone from which rulers were given their second bodies. Time has reduced the Olmec world unevenly. Thatch roofs vanished within years, wooden tools decayed, cloth, names, songs, and spoken histories disappeared almost completely. Earthen monuments softened into hills. The largest faces endured, not because their makers expected every part of their civilization to survive, but because basalt yields slowly to weather and human patience had already given it form. The individuals represented in those stones could never have imagined the people who now stand before them. They could not have known the names of modern nations, the languages spoken in museums, or the machines used to move and scan their portraits. Perhaps they believed their monuments would preserve a lineage forever. Perhaps the heads were meant only for a political moment, to watch one plaza through one reign. Their true journey has extended far beyond any purpose their makers could have planned. What remains is not immortality in the way rulers usually desire it. The faces survive, but the identities do not. Power remains visible. While ownership of that power has dissolved, the stone preserves authority and anonymity together. It reminds the modern world that even the strongest political order eventually becomes landscape, and that memory often keeps the image while losing the story. Still, something has crossed the distance. A sculptor once looked closely at another human being and understood that the bend of a lip, the weight of an eyelid, and the shape of a cheek could carry identity. That act of attention remains within the stone. Across more than 3,000 years, one human face continues to meet another. As evening settles over the lowlands, shadows gather beneath the carved brows. The mouths become quiet lines. Rainwater follows old tool marks and disappears into the earth below. The kingdoms they watched have passed away, but the colossal faces remain beneath the wide tropical sky, patient, weathered, and still looking outward.